Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Chris Gans. As was mentioned, I'm a territory manager for Neogen. I will do the very brief commercial of our company, just because I spoke to a number of you online, I think in February, and one of the things that despite our success in Canada, especially in the dairy industry, a lot of people don't know us, although we're getting better known. We have been in Canada as a company since 2016. We have done exclusively in Canada the bovine species in terms of genomic testing. About 2 years ago, we opened up a lab, an actual genomics lab in Edmonton, on the southeast side of Edmonton. We provide genomic testing services to all the Canadian AI companies with the exception of ST. When I say Canadian, I mean those operating in Canada, as well as the one Canadian AI company. And so you may, if you're dealing with the AI companies and they're talking about genomics, it's quite likely that your sample will wind up going to our lab in Edmonton. So that is, we also have provided support to Christine and Flavio on their very large dairy cluster project. They have been genomically testing over the last 2 years a target population of 25,000 Holsteins, and we have processed all the samples to date for that, so it's almost 20,000 samples. And last year we did over 50,000 samples in Canada, all dairy animals. And for context, our nearest competition, which is Holstein Canada, did about 8 to 10. So quietly, with not much fanfare, we have the largest market share in Canada. I'm personally based out of Aurora, Ontario. So for any of you that are genomic testing or would like a visit or would like to learn more, I am within driving distance of most of you. And the part of my role is to work with dairy farmers to explain genomics to them, the potential of genomics. And so I'll move on from that. I'm going to go parts of my presentation. I'm going to go through pretty quickly because Christine did a really good job of explaining genomics. It's part of my presentation too, but she's a professor. I'm not. She did a great job of doing that, so that's part we can shorten my presentation a little bit. But I showed this last time, and I just want to show it again to anchor into your mind the cost, some of the costs of doing business. And the pandemic has certainly changed this. There are input costs for raising a heifer to lactation. In 2011, that cost was in and around $2,200. I adjusted for inflation up to today, which puts it around $2,700. And it's going to go up, folks, even more, right? I was talking to some folks at lunch about the cost of various inputs to the farm are really accelerating. So one of the things that I talk a lot about when I'm speaking to dairy farmers is where are you in your heifer replacement inventory management? So how many people here have 50% or more heifer replacements? So in other words, if you're milking 80 animals, you got 40 heifer replacements under the age of 2. Okay. So the sweet spot number that we talk about is 35 to 40%. So there are people in the room that have a lot more heifer replacements than probably they need. And they do it at a cost of somewhere, you can take whatever number you want, 22, 27, whatever. That's an additional cost to your dairy that you may want to look at. So when I talk about getting into genomics, I'm talking about let's hit the low-hanging fruit first. Let's look at what the right size is of heifer replacements in our inventory. And so the role of genomics in that allows you at a very, very early age, like right after birth, typically 3 or 4 days, to get information and data on that animal so that you can make a decision about whether or not you want to keep that animal in your herd. And if you do that with a regular routine basis, never mind, we haven't even talked about genetic gain yet. We're just talking about let's use some sorting tools. Let's use it as a sorting tool to reduce the number of animals that we have in our heifer pens to a number that's more in line with the sweet spot of the market. Then that in and of itself is a good ROI or cost return. And I walk through that. But in general, when you use the average of about 100, and I know that in Jersey herds, that's a less common number. Jersey herds tend to be slightly smaller, so this is based sort of on a Holstein ratio. But the savings opportunity runs into the tens, if not $20,000 in terms of cost reduction opportunities. And who wouldn't want to save $10,000 or $20,000 these days? And this is after the cost of genomics, which basically nowadays runs in the $40 range per animal. So genomics to economics on a dairy farm, we look at three particular areas of where we want to focus on. Number one is your replacement heifer inventory. And if that's all you ever do, I've just demonstrated that there's a good financial benefit to that. But there are other opportunities as well. There's a myriad of opportunities to utilize genomics on a dairy farm, but they sort of fall into a couple of different areas. Beef on dairy, another interesting play that has, as most of you know, has really increased over the last few years. A lot of dairy farmers are breeding their bottom end to beef because those calves are of much more value to than a milking heifer. And then performance increases for genetic gain, which typically fall into, from a commercial perspective, can I do more with less animals? Can I hit my annual quota with a few less animals and therefore be more financially efficient? And so when we look at that sort of expressed in common terms, I have more heifers than I currently need. I get that every day. And it doesn't matter if it's a Jersey herd, a Holstein herd. I was talking to an 800 cow crossbred herd in Quebec, asking me, are there genomic tools that he could have because he's got too many heifers in his pen. So he's doing Hojo crosses, Norwegian red crosses. And so we're seeing, I have this conversation more frequently than any other conversation with dairy farms. I just want to get my heifer pen the right size because I got way too many. And that's mostly due to the advent of sex semen. We're breeding a lot of female animals now, and this situation has gotten to the point where this is sometimes the number one topic of discussion. I need all of the milk, but I don't need all of the genetics. This particular statement drives a lot of the beef on dairy. So one way you get the milk without the genetics is you just breed your top producing cows to beef. How many are breeding beef on their farms now? Yeah, not an insignificant number. And then the last one is what we talk about. And these are actually quotes that we've gotten from dairy farmers. These are mostly US-centric quotes. But we talk about the fact that I want to drive genetic gain. I want to right-size my herd. I want to make sure that I've got the most efficient animals. I want to make sure my composites are where they need to be to maximize my milk check. And so this is what they're doing. And then in the bottom last line of that, we even talked about it at lunch, we talked about parentage errors. So one of the things I'll show you later is we generate a report for the dairy farmer once their genomic results are in. And there's a line, there's an area on our dashboard where they call animals not reported. And the number one cause of animals not receiving a genomic evaluation is because the parentage is incorrect. So my colleague Mary Barrett spends at least 10 or 15 hours a week with the breed associations correcting parentage errors from folks that have purchased genomic results. So when we talk about this discussion around inbreeding and all that kind of stuff, incorrect parentage is also a factor, could be a potential factor in that. So genomic testing allows you to reduce the incidences of parentage errors. And that does have a tangible financial impact on your dairy farm. So Christine went through a lot of this and explained it. What I want to give you the perspective of it from an economic perspective is genomic information is data. So this is just another set of data that you're producing in your dairy farm. So we all, a lot of us use Dairy Comp 305. We look at the dashboards. We're managing our animals in heat. We're using a lot of data to run our farms. And genomics is just another data set that allows you to make decisions, make business decisions. And so, you know, the old adage, if you don't measure it, you can't manage it. So what we have with the genomic data that comes out of your genomic tests are traits, are a variety of traits. And depending on what level of genomic test that you're doing, because different companies produce different amounts of traits, you can start to look at the composition of your herd from a genomic level. What is on my herd? What is in my heifer pens, from potential milk yield and potential fat and protein, right down to somatic cell scores, daughter preg rates, daughter calving ease, and those are all data points that you can look at for the purposes of making decisions in keep cull decisions or things like that. Now, one of the things that companies like Neogen do, and Zoetis and ST, the companies that are doing a lot of testing, a lot of genomic testing in the dairy industry, is they provide what we call bioinformatic tools. So what happens when you genomically test? As you saw with Christina, you've got this tremendous amount of data, these 3 billion pieces of data, these base pair data. You've tested it, and now you have to make sense of that data. You have to put it in a format that a non-geneticist. So when we do testing for Christine, we just send her team the files, these enormous files, right? And they make sense of the data. But for commercial dairymen, we have to put it in a format that you can understand and utilize. And that's a value that a lot of the labs do nowadays when we're testing for dairy farms or anything for that matter. So again, it's a data management tool. Trait score and indexes are the key data in a genomic-driven breeding strategy. So yeah, so one of the nice things is when you work with your AI companies, all the AI companies, and I'm completely Switzerland on this. I know that the EastGen fellows here, but we're completely Switzerland on this. But all of them have mating programs, and all of them utilize the heifer genomic data in their breeding programs. They have the ability to not only give you all the bulls have been genomically tested, but if you're also genomically testing your heifers, your female animals, they are able to take that information together to help guide you on your breeding decisions. And so again, this allows more accurate breeding decisions in relation to what you're going to keep, what you're going to cull, what you potentially, your ratio of sex versus conventional semen, and also, what portion of your population you're going to go beef on dairy with. So it just helps globally manage your inventory much better, much more accurately, with less errors, and errors do cost you money. There are also some additional benefits of genomic testing. All the tests are able to give you information related to genetic abnormalities to make sure we can call these recessives. Anything that might be potentially show up that could be very detrimental to your calves. There are also genetic conditions that are favored in the market. A lot of you know polled and non-polled. On the Holstein side, I bet you've all probably heard this surge of A2 testing because everybody's now decided in the Holstein population that their cows should be A2. And so these are all also things that can be managed through the genomic testing program. And we talked a little bit about this in Christine's. The genomics gives you a much more accurate picture than your traditional PTAs. It's probably twice as accurate as it, and in terms of your generational interval, which we saw on the inbreeding side could be potentially negative, it also has a positive in that if you're trying to change the complexion of your herd, if you're trying to increase certain traits within that herd, it can go a lot quicker with genomics. The generation intervals increase. So instead of 4 generations, you could do it in 1 or 2. you can improve the milk production across your herd in a generation or two versus 4 or 5 generations. Any questions so far? Just want to talk a little bit about this. This is more informational, and again, I don't make any value judgments here. But for your information, and this is for those of you that are genomic testing, and just out of curiosity, how many folks are genomic testing on their herds right now? So they're going to know what this is, but for those that are not, that don't know, the genomic evaluations that are commonly used on dairy farms in Canada come from 2 sources. And so Lactanet does its genetic evaluation. You will hear terms like ProDollars, which is an index of traits that are generated by Lactanet to to evaluate, to give you a score on a cow. And they have a number of other ones, conformation traits, and those traits are different than the CDCB evaluation, which comes from the U.S. Department of Agriculture. And you would hear terms like net merit and fluid yield. They're different in that they're different organizations doing the genetic evaluations. The emphasis in Canada on their genetic evaluations, they look at different factors, different ratios of the variety of traits than the US does. But the reason why I want to point this out is because depending on what company is doing the genomic testing for you, they're going to favor one or the other type of evaluation. So if they are a US-based AI company, they're probably going to speak more in terms of the CDCB evaluations. And if they're Canadian, they'll tend to talk more about the Canadian. Either one is fine. They're both very, very well done evaluations. I don't favor one over the other, but just know that you might hear different terminology, and you want to know where the origin of that terminology is. Now with Neogen, we provide both. So every time you test with Neogen, you have access to both evaluations, either the US values or the Canadian values. And those values are adjusted on a periodic basis as more data comes in on the daughters, and we know that as the proof rounds. So I want to just talk a little bit about, so to the group that is not doing genomic testing, and for anybody in the room that is thinking about genomic testing, a couple of things that you got to think about before you get into it. A lot of you know what your goals are. I mean, the conversation around my table at lunch was very much around the goals of the dairy farm. So, you want to think about, when you're starting to think about whether or not we're going to do genomic testing on our farm, you really got to think about your farm's goals. Where do you see your farm in a year from now, 2 years from now, 3 years from now, 4 years from now? You really want to make sure that you understand what you're doing well. You want to understand where your weaknesses are. Are you carrying too much inventory? Are you exposed in that particular area? What challenges do you face? And I wanted to just talk a little bit about this one because the last 2 or 3 years have been rather challenging for everybody, and the dairy industry is not exempt to that. There's a lot of pressure, economic pressure particularly right now. There's an awful lot of instability in the world, and it's driving the prices of things through the roof. I saw a graph the other day of shipping container costs have risen by 350%. So whatever's getting shipped from China to United States has increased from 350%. So where's that going to show up? We buy a lot of commercial goods, right? That's going to show up in the price of everything that we buy. So, and then a lot of you I know are experiencing increases in your feed costs. So think about that, but then there's also local challenges, right? There's local human resource challenges. We've had the Great Resignation. It's hard to get good people. And so think about some of the challenges that you face in terms of the context of that, and then what opportunities you might have out there. So I know this is sort of basic business 101, but the only reason why I say this is if you're thinking about genomics, You want to think about it in the context of your farm operation, what you're trying to improve. What is the goal of bringing genomics into your dairy operation? Is it to reduce your herd size? And that's an important part of that, because without that context, you can't measure the impact of whether or not that was a successful investment. So when we look at, the perfect dairy cow, and again, I do apologize, this is not a Jersey cow, I know that. But I think that when we look at all the trait and index selection, it really evolves around improving some key traits within a dairy animal. And I don't need to go into this too much, but we all look at trying to resist mastitis and keep our somatic cell scores down. We want to make sure that the teats and feet are in good shape. We want to make sure that we have a cow that can give us a high milk yield with the correct composite ratios that we need to maximize our investment. We want to make sure it's a very healthy cow with few metabolic disorders. I want to make sure that she breeds easily and births easily. And genomics allows you, through a genomic breeding strategy, to look at each one of these areas. And every dairy farm is different. Every dairy farm wants to improve certain areas and emphasize certain areas more than others. So for example, teat position, if you're a robotic farm, there are optimal teat positions that you might want to breed for a robotic farm. So this should be driving, when you're looking at your genomic breeding program, you should be looking at these areas and saying to yourself, what are the most important areas that I want to improve on over using genomics? Getting advice is my next. So this is all the area, every one of these companies and associations is involved and is interested in you being successful with genomics. And so you have a great deal of information out there, and not for nothing, but Google's, that's how, when I started this job, that's how I learned a lot of things about genomic testing. I mean, my company trained me quite well, but there's a lot of work, a lot of things I found out about that. But all of these companies are involved in one way or the other with genomic testing and can provide you with great information and great advice on the decisions that, if you want to engage in a genomic breeding strategy, to provide you with really, really great information on how to do that, what to look for, and of course, University of Guelph, of course. I mean, Christine and her team, they're doing some extensive research and are very, very familiar with these programs. So, just going to look a little bit at some of the data. So there's typically different ways that you can get data back from a genomic test. And so one of the things that I do personally with when I'm working with a dairy farm through one of our AI partners is I will help the dairy farmer select the traits that they are most interested in looking and evaluating their herd under. So we typically look at milk yield, or we'll typically look at preg rates, we'll look at things like somatic cell scores, and then we'll start to rank the animals based on their scores. And I use a spreadsheet to do that, and what I'll do is I'll create a ranking system based on that, and then they can help them make decisions based on those rankings. And I find that to be very, 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 very helpful in that. And many of the times we're confirming what the dairy farmer already knows, but more often than not, there's a few surprises. So certain animals that they thought had certain traits that were very strong, in fact, showed up not having that level of strength in that trait. So that's one area, that's one way we can take the data, we can manage the data, and we can help you make business decisions on that data. The second thing that we do specifically is we have a dashboard that every company, every dairy farm that tests through us will wind up getting a dashboard where they can start to sort their animals based on the traits on that, and those can be Canadian or U.S. traits. It's showing it U.S. traits right now, but we have a tab that you can see all the Canadian lactanet traits as well, and so you can easily set up this dashboard to look at the key traits that you want to evaluate your herd on, and make decisions based on your breeding strategies off of that. And if anybody in the room is doing that, and is doing that through one of our partners, I've left you my contact information. I'm happy to walk you through any of this anytime. We can do it on a Teams conference, or I can come out to your farm, and I can help you utilize that data to make better decisions. There are other formats that it comes in. Our friends at CEMEX and EastGen have a wonderful app, the Elevate app, and that really is sort of the forefront, and where everything's being driven to is that you're standing in your barn with your phone, and you're getting your results coming in, and I think that that's a terrific contribution to the genomic testing that the CEMEX folks have done. And also, we can move information in and out of dairy comp. We've worked very closely with Jeremy at Lactanet. He's helped us a great deal working on the data transfer between dairy comp 305. So taking information out of dairy comp 305 for your submission process, as well as bringing in data into dairy comp for your genomic tests, so that you can have the data right where you're looking at it. All right. So I just want to leave you with a couple of thoughts. The cost of genomic testing, I think, is at a point now where it's accessible to most dairy farmers. I think it's something that you have to look at, no matter who you intend on doing it with. You have to look at it as a management tool for your dairy farm. As Christine mentioned, the train's left the station and is moving quickly. Last year, when I started in this industry, was probably about 12% of dairy farms were genomically testing. That number is in the 20s now. We look at the data coming out of CDCB as well as Lactanet, and we can see that so many more dairy farms are genomically testing. It's a tool that is being increased in use, and so it's something that you should give some serious consideration for. Again, through whomever you prefer to test it. But one of my biases is really the relationship between genomic testing is with your AI company, and making sure that the decisions that you're making on your breeding decisions are driven by a genomic test gives you much more accuracy, better decisions than would otherwise. So just some last thoughts. Begin with the end in mind, understand why you want to do genomic testing, get advice, align those traits and selection with the goals, and stay consistent. It's an investment over time. One set of genomic tests isn't going to get you to your goals. It's something you have to apply consistently over time. Alrighty, any questions?
Dollars, how much?
Testing?
Depending on what you're...
Mileage may vary depending on your dealer, but I would start with $40 to $45 as a range.
That gives you what?
It gives you a genomic test.
Yeah.
It gives you the data.
Which is parentage and genomic, right?
Pardon me?
You're getting parentage, genomic.
Yes.
A2, is that extra?
A2 would be extra. It's about $5 extra.
Yeah.
Is that the 4K base pair or the 50K base pair?
Ours is a 65K base pair.
Yeah, I had, and once again, it's fantastic. Everybody's coming to the symposium to try and get some takeaways for their own farm, and you mentioned farm goals. There's some of us that sit around breed board tables as well. So if a breed adopted a goal of keeping a genetic, I think Christine, you mentioned 80 some odd animals as a big population. What would, if a breed association tried to come to Neogen, what would Neogen's solution of not having any of those descendants disappear? Would there be a, have you ever had that question before?
I have not. I just go to Christine's first point on her three things. If you genomically test everything, or as much as you can, you've got the data to make those decisions more accurately, right? If you don't, you're guessing, right? But if you do, you've got the information that you can, at least on a farm level, manage that. So let me just tell you, there are other breed associations out there, not in the bovine space, that mandate their breeders genomically test, because they are looking at that as, so from a breed level, mandating genomic testing, and I know that some people may panic if you say that, but that is one path where you can collectively, as a breed association, manage inbreeding issues. And Christine, with that, I mean, you've got, as a breed association, you've taken on to say we're going to genomically test as many animals as we can, because we now have the data to make better decisions on avoiding those kind of situations. But that's, I can just hear murmurs around the room saying, don't do that. But you're right.
Actually, that's an interesting point, and you can explain this better. But with the red breeds, because a certain number of genotype females offers the equivalent of one sire in terms of increasing your base population, right? So those breeds are encouraging genotyping on a much more massive scale than we're doing. And so that how allows you to hopefully, I think the underlying problem here is that we might be creating problems faster than we can identify them with genome. We're not there yet, but curly calf syndrome, once we find it and we deal with it in our mating guide, it's not a problem. The problem is that as that curve creeps up, maybe we're creating the problems faster than we're finding the SNPs.
Yeah, it's really an interesting question that you raised. I mean, mutations happen all the time, right? All of us have at least 300 nasty mutations that could have been really terrible and could have just knocked us out before we even got conceived. We don't know that, but we're lucky to be around, right? We have to think about it that way. Wayne Dickinson, I don't know if you guys know him, he's a Holstein breeder out east. He had a calf that was born a dwarf. And he's like, is this because of the bull? Is it because of something I fed it? Or is it because of something else? And I was kind of perplexed, and we took a sample of the calf, we took a sample of the dam, we took a semen sample, and I sequenced everything. So sequence means I looked at all of those 3 billion base pairs of the parents and the offspring. And it was really interesting because there was nothing wrong with the sire, there was nothing wrong with the dam, but the calf had a mutation at one letter. And we could find that. And that's the reason when we compared that calf's DNA to everybody else's DNA that we had sequenced in the world, that calf was the only animal that was alive and that had that one specific mutation. So it's incredible what you can do. It costs a ton of money, but it's pretty cool, right? It's pretty cool. So your question about a breed, a whole breed, if you have a really small breed with small numbers of animals, yeah, it's probably a good idea, but it depends on costs, right? And everything has to be paid for, and everybody wants to make money. So, yeah, it's a hard thing.
Yes.
That right. We've heard this several times today that we don't have a big enough population to have research done on different reports that the larger breed is getting. So, what is the magic number for us to be able to get to be identified with research? We almost feel like this is almost racism because we have brown cows, we're not allowed to. It's just, I know it goes back to dollars and cents, but how do we help our people? It's chicken and egg again. How do we help our people get to that point? If we can't get to that point, then we don't have research.
It's a great question, and I have to think about it, to be honest with you, because I love the colored breeds. I think that I teach in Switzerland as well, in Bern, and there's lots of different colors and lots of different animals running around there, and they really celebrate these different breeds, and I think that's something that we're missing in Canada. We've got, 94% of our milking herd is Holstein, so they've got pretty wide elbows, right, and then big mouths, and they're big animals too, right, but Jerseys are kind of sweet little things, and they milk just as fantastically as Holsteins do, but they don't get a lot of attention, just because right now of the numbers, right? Research dollars are limited. We're busy right now doing feed efficiency trials just as an example, that's a $16 million project, and we're only going to get 17,000 individually measured animals. So we're trying to think of ways how to do it cheaply to get Jersey cattle as well, because that is the second largest population, right? So we're trying, but we need to think a little bit more about this diversity. And I'll take that message with me, and we'll think about how to do that.
Any other questions?
What's the break point with that thought in mind for a company like yours? So you send 100,000 samples in, does that reduce the cost of running those tests? Do you know what I mean? Like, are there some savings that could be done as an industry if
Of course.
there was okay, let's all get together and let's send as many as people want to send and try to get as much information as we can?
So I would answer as a salesman. I'm not, right? I'll be honest, because that's what I do, right? If your association at the national level wants to get together with us and talk about a program that we could run that would encourage many, many more Jersey, I'd be at that meeting with bells on. But I think that has to be driven from the association level, right? Right, and so, I mean, I can tell you that Christine's price, without details, for her project is probably a little bit better than what Kevin's price is through Select Sire, because the numbers are, so yes, there if we're looking at a volume opportunity through an association, I'd certainly, but to say what the break point is, I mean, it'd have to be in the tens of thousands for sure, right?
On a related question, you said you processed 50,000 samples last year.
All through the,
So, what do you offhand know what the numbers are for the Jersey breed within that?
No, I not off the, I would,
2,000 or 5,000 or not even?
I don't, maybe not even that, and I'll tell you why. The numbers are being driven by very, very large Holstein herds. Like, we're talking the 100,000, like, top herds in Canada from populations all genomically test portions of their population, and they're our customers, right? So it's also the type of customer that we have. So within that, I don't know how many would be Jersey, but that's something I could dig up. That's not, getting that answer is not the problem. I just don't off the top of my head.
Curious. Like, if we know that there's, what's 12,000 registrations a year roughly, so like,
Yeah.
it'd be interesting, like, what percentage are being contributed. Any other questions from the floor today?
Just a quick comment on these last two comments. When you talked about as a breed, everything, Jersey breed being small and all those types of things, just give me a food for thought to think about it a different way. Because it is a smaller breed. Breeders in this room can help fund this themselves to do something a little bit different. If you take the very fair rate as to what is expected or what we perceive it to be versus what is actually coming back, or what we can flex to that, significantly higher. So for all the things that Christina talked about, for all the things we talked about, for everything, if you had a breed that was economically tested, where it can be verified, which means the level of genetic evaluations is way more accurate, everything's way more accurate. That would be something that would be unique to this breed, and this other breed, to everybody.
Right.
Because there's no other breed in no other country that comes close to even doing anything like that.
And then you turn all of that data over to Christine, and she'll help you make a better Jersey cow, right?